Hi there, I'm Amanda Castor with Material Girl Quilts. Today I'm going to share a tutorial with you on how to make the disappearing 4-patch block. That's the block that I used to create the baby quilt behind me and this one right here. I think it's a wonderful block that creates movement across your quilt. It kind of looks woven and it's great for using up your scraps, but today I'm going to show you how to use pre-cut 5-inch squares to create the blocks. And in fact, one charm pack and some background fabric will give you a 32-inch by 40-inch baby quilt. So let's get started. To make the baby size quilt, you will need one charm pack of your favorite collection or 40 5-inch squares, as well as 40 background squares. So you can either purchase a solid charm pack or cut your own squares, which is what I did. Now to make the block, you will select 2 print squares and 2 background squares. And you will lay them out so that the print squares are on opposite corners and so are the background squares. And then you will sew them together into 2 different rows and then sew the rows together to create a block. Your finished block will look like this. Now I'll flip it over and show you that when I sewed like the rows together, I pressed toward the print fabric, and then when I sewed the 2 rows together to create the block, I just pressed in one direction. So now that your block is sewn together, we're going to cut from here to create the disappearing 4-patch. So the first thing we're going to do, and also by the way, I'm using a rotating cutting mat. It's going to be very helpful for cutting this block up. So what we need to do is get a ruler and we will cut 1 inch on every side of these sewn seams here. So we'll start with this one. We'll line the ruler up at 1 inch. Cut. Spin it around. Line it up on this seam, 1 inch, and cut. Rotate again. And you do the same thing until you have made 4 cuts 1 inch from the center seams. Now that all of your cuts are made, it's time to create the magic of this block. So what you're going to do is you will leave these 4 outside squares as they are, and then these sections you will turn 180 degrees. So you'll flip these rectangle sections, each of them 180 degrees, or just the opposite direction, as well as your tiny little 4-patch in the center. Once you have flipped all of the center sections 180 degrees, it's time to sew this block together. To do that, we will sew into rows and then sew the rows together to complete the block. So this will be the first row here, and then this skinny section in the center will be the second row, and this will be the third row. So once those are each sewn into rows, you sew the rows together to complete the block, and here is what the finished block will look like. Now I'm going to flip this over to show you how I decided to press. So when I sewed the rows together, for the wider rows, I pressed towards the large squares, so out towards the large squares, and in the center row I pressed in towards the tiny little 4-patch so that my seams would nest. And then once the rows were all sewn together, I pressed out towards the wider rows. Your block at this point will measure 8.5 inches square. Now there are a couple of options when you lay out the blocks for a disappearing 4-patch quilt. I prefer to lay all the blocks out so that they're facing the same direction, like this. But you could also lay out the blocks so that they rotate every other block. And when you do that, it creates little windows where these black background squares meet. And here's an example of what that would look like in the entire quilt. Now for the baby size quilt, you will make a total of 20 blocks and you will lay them out in 5 rows of 4 blocks each. If you don't have a baby to make a quilt for, you could also turn these blocks into a cute table runner. If you made all 20 blocks, you could place them into 2 rows of 10 blocks each, which would equal 16 inches by 80-inch table runner. And if you'd like to make a larger quilt, you can use 4 charm packs or cut down a layer cake into 5-inch squares and then create a total of 80 blocks. You would then place those 80 blocks into 10 rows of 8 blocks each, and that quilt would finish at 64 inches by 80 inches. As you can see, there's a lot of options with this block. You don't have to stop with the baby quilt. You can make it much larger, turn it into whatever you like. I decided for this baby quilt to add a 1-inch border to the outside just to finish it off with the background color, and I think it looks nice. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please click the like button and subscribe so that you can make sure you don't miss any tutorials going forward. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.